Have you ever wondered why, no matter how hard you try, life sometimes feels like it's slipping right through your fingers? Why every plan you carefully lay out seems to unravel the tighter you hold it? There's a hidden truth in the way the universe works, a paradox that has confounded minds for centuries, and yet offers the key to lasting peace. When you finally let go, everything falls perfectly into place. This isn't about giving up on your dreams or living without direction. It's about releasing the desperate need to control every outcome, every person, every twist of fate. Because the very act of clinging to people, to expectations, to fears, creates the suffering we spend our lives trying to escape. Most of us were taught that to be safe, we need to plan every step, anticipate every obstacle, prepare for every possibility. We grow up believing that certainty is security, that control is power, and that only by tightening our grip can we find peace. But what if the opposite were true? What if true peace emerges not from gripping harder, but from opening your hands, your mind, your heart, and trusting what comes? Buddhist wisdom reveals a profound paradox. The things you chase most desperately often run fastest from you, while what you allow space to arrive finds its way naturally into your life. Like a butterfly landing softly on an open palm, serenity comes when we stop trying to trap it. Take a moment now and feel the tension you carry. Perhaps it's the weight of needing to be perfect, the fear of disappointing someone, or the relentless voice in your head warning of what might go wrong. All these worries pull you out of the present moment and anchor you in imaginary scenarios that haven't even happened and may never happen. Imagine standing by a quiet pond. If you thrash the water, it becomes murky and chaotic, reflecting nothing. But when you step back and let the water settle, it clears, revealing the sky, the trees, the truth of what's around you. Our minds work the same way. Peace is not something we force. It's something we find when we stop stirring. Today, I want to share a journey back to that quiet pond within you. A journey to understand why letting go is not weakness, but the gateway to strength. Not surrendering to fate, but opening yourself to life's true rhythm. Because the more we chase control, the more we lose ourselves in the chase. But when we loosen our grip, life's natural flow carries us exactly where we need to be. If you've been feeling stuck, lost, or exhausted by the need to keep it all together, know this: you are not alone. And the ancient teachings of Buddhism offer a powerful invitation. An invitation to step off the endless treadmill of worry and come home to a place of profound stillness inside you. Let this be the day you begin to trade fear for faith, tension for trust, and endless doing for simple, radical being. Let this be the moment you stop measuring your worth by what you control and start discovering who you truly are beneath the noise. Because in the quiet spaces between your thoughts, in the moments you stop trying to force life into your mold, you'll find something incredible waiting for you. Clarity, freedom, and a peace that no one can take away. We spend so much of our lives believing that if we can just hold on tightly enough, plan thoroughly enough, and control every variable, we can protect ourselves from pain, loss, or disappointment. Control gives us a comforting illusion of safety. It makes us feel powerful in a world that often feels chaotic. But the harder we try to control everything, the more tangled and suffocated we become. And instead of bringing peace, our attempts to manage life only amplify our fear. Think about the moments you've clung the hardest. Perhaps you tried desperately to save a relationship that was already slipping away, or you obsessed over a job you were terrified to lose, replaying conversations over and over in your mind, convinced you could fix things if you just tried a bit harder. In those moments, did control bring you peace? Or did it leave you more anxious, exhausted, and lost than before? The paradox is clear. What we cling to most tightly often becomes the source of our deepest suffering. It's like trying to hold sand in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. Yet time and again, we repeat the pattern, convinced that if we just grip harder, we can keep everything in place. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that this urge to control doesn't come from strength, but from fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of change, fear of the unknown. Our minds crave predictability, and so we cling to people, plans, identities, and outcomes. But life isn't a machine with fixed parts we can arrange to our liking. It's more like a river, constantly shifting, beyond our command. Imagine a mighty oak standing tall in the face of a storm, its branches stiff and unyielding. When the wind grows fierce, its rigidity causes it to snap. Nearby, a bamboo sways easily, bending with each gust, adapting to the storm's force, and when the winds pass, the bamboo remains unharmed. Like the bamboo, we survive life's storms not by resisting them, but by learning how to bend, to yield, to trust the natural flow instead of fighting it. You might ask, if I don't control things, won't everything fall apart? But what if it's the very act of clinging that's causing things to unravel? What if your overthinking is pushing people away? Your need to plan every detail is draining your energy, and your obsession with certainty is keeping you from enjoying the beauty of the present. Letting go isn't about giving up or becoming passive. It's about realizing the limits of your power and focusing your energy on what you can truly influence. Your own actions, your integrity, your presence. When you release your white-knuckle grip on everything else, you don't lose control, you find freedom. Freedom from the endless cycle of worry, from the exhausting need to predict every outcome, from the fear of things not going exactly as you planned. It's a subtle but life-changing shift. Caring without clinging, committing without controlling, loving without possessing. And when you do, something remarkable happens. Instead of forcing life, you begin to flow with it. You become more present, more open, more resilient. You stop reacting out of fear and start responding with calm clarity. So take a moment now, breathe deeply, and gently ask yourself, where in my life am I holding on so tightly that I'm only causing myself more pain? What might happen if I loosened my grip and trusted that I can face whatever comes? Because in that softening, you'll find not weakness but the quiet strength of surrender. And it's in that surrender, the moment you stop fighting life, that you finally allow everything to fall into place. Understanding why letting go matters is one thing, but practicing it, truly living it, is where transformation happens. Because in our daily lives, we're constantly pulled back into old patterns of control. Overthinking, micromanaging, worrying about the future, replaying the past. The art of letting go asks us to train ourselves to respond differently, to move through life with a softer, more open heart. So how do we do it? It begins with a simple but powerful awareness, noticing when we're clenching. Our minds and bodies offer many signs. Perhaps your shoulders tense up, your jaw tightens, your thoughts start spiraling into what-if scenarios. That's the moment to pause, to breathe, to remind yourself gently, I don't need to control everything right now. Imagine you're floating down a river in a small boat. When you panic and try to row frantically against the current, you exhaust yourself and go nowhere, or worse, you capsize. But when you trust the river, you can steer lightly, respond to obstacles calmly, and move forward with far less effort. Letting go is like learning to navigate life's river without fighting it every inch of the way. One of the simplest but most profound practices to support this shift is mindful breathing. When you feel yourself starting to mentally tight, stop and take 3 slow, deep breaths. Inhale, noticing the air filling your lungs. Exhale, imagining the tension leaving your body. Even just 3 conscious breaths can interrupt the cycle of control and bring you back to the present. Another practice is to gently question your fears. When you catch yourself trying to control an outcome, ask, "What am I afraid will happen if I let go?" Most of the time, the fear is exaggerated or even imagined. By naming it, you take away its power. By seeing it clearly, you start to realize that the need to control is not protection, it's a prison. Consider the story of a young monk who approached his teacher, worried about the future of his training and fearful he might fail. The teacher took the monk to a pond, handed him a stone, and asked him to throw it into the water. The ripples spread across the surface. "When you try to control life," the teacher said, "your worries are like that stone, they disturb the stillness of your mind, creating ripples of fear that obscure clarity. But if you let go, your mind becomes like a calm pond, reflecting life as it truly is." This doesn't mean you stop caring, or that you abandon your responsibilities. It means you engage fully with life, but with a sense of trust rather than fear. You do your best, but you don't attach your peace to the results. You show up with presence, but you release the illusion that you can force everything to match your plans. Each morning, before the rush of the day takes over, you can set an intention. Today, I will do what I can, but I will also trust what I cannot control. I will respond with calm instead of reacting with fear. This simple commitment creates space for peace to grow. Because true letting go is not passive. It's an active choice to trust. It's not resigning to fate. It's recognizing that life unfolds with a wisdom beyond our plans. And when we stop resisting, we open ourselves to unexpected possibilities, to moments of grace that controlling minds can never anticipate. So the next time you feel life pulling you into chaos, remember, you can tighten your grip and exhaust yourself, or you can soften, breathe, and let the current carry you forward. And in that trust, you may just find yourself exactly where you need to be. Have you ever noticed how your mind jumps restlessly from one thought to the next, worrying about tomorrow, replaying yesterday, creating stories about things that haven't even happened? In Buddhism, this restless, scattered mental activity is called the monkey mind. Just like a monkey leaping from branch to branch, our thoughts swing wildly, rarely settling in the quiet stillness of the present moment. And here's the painful irony. Most of us believe that if we think hard enough, if we analyze every possibility, we will find peace. But the truth is, overthinking is not the path to peace. It's the main obstacle blocking it. The more we chase thoughts, the more tangled we become. Our minds spin like a pond stirred by a stick, muddying the water until we can't see clearly. When we try to think our way out of every fear, every challenge, we only create more confusion. That's because peace doesn't come from the thoughts themselves, but from the space beyond them, the silent awareness that notices each thought rise and fall. There's a beautiful Zen teaching: muddy water clears when left alone. It reminds us that the mind, too, becomes clear when we stop constantly disturbing it with endless chatter. But silence feels scary for many of us. Stillness can feel like emptiness. We're taught that to be productive, valuable, or safe, we must keep moving, planning, and doing. So we keep our minds busy, convinced that one more thought will bring the clarity we crave. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if every extra thought only clouds the truth? What if the answers we seek appear not when we think more, but when we finally become still enough to listen? Consider this story. A young warrior came to a Zen master, desperate for advice on how to calm his constant worry. The master silently handed him a cup of water, then stirred it vigorously with a spoon. The water became cloudy and chaotic. "This is your mind when you chase every thought," the master said. He set the cup down, and together they watched as the water slowly cleared on its own. And this, he continued, is your mind when you allow silence. That's the invitation of Buddhist practice, to recognize that you are not your thoughts. Thoughts are like weather passing through the sky, sometimes stormy, sometimes bright, always changing. But you are the sky itself, wide, spacious, unshaken by the passing clouds. Practicing this perspective begins with simply noticing when your mind starts to spin. Rather than following each thought down its rabbit hole, you can pause, take a conscious breath, and gently remind yourself, this is just thinking. You don't have to judge it, fight it, or believe every word your mind says. You just notice and return to your breath, to your body, to this moment. It can help to sit in silence each day, even for a few minutes. In that stillness, you begin to see the patterns of your mind more clearly, the worries, the judgments, the stories. And as you keep practicing, something amazing happens. You realize you don't have to act on every thought or let it control your mood. You begin to find a calm center within you that no thought can disturb. Because true peace doesn't come from having the perfect plan or the right answer. It comes from stepping back, letting the mind settle, and resting in the quiet awareness that watches without clinging. In that silence, you find the clarity, freedom, and deep sense of peace that thinking alone can never bring. So the next time your mind starts jumping like a restless monkey, try this. Close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and remind yourself, peace is not in the noise of my thoughts, but in the stillness I can choose right now. One of the most painful traps we fall into is believing that loving someone means trying to control them. We worry about the choices they make. We try to fix their problems. We take on their emotions as our own, convinced that our constant involvement will keep them safe, happy, or close to us. But this isn't love. It's attachment disguised as care. And instead of building connection, it creates tension, resentment, and exhaustion for both sides. We do this with partners, children, friends, even colleagues. We believe it's our responsibility to manage how others feel or what they do. But the harder we try to control them, the more they pull away, or the more we lose ourselves in the process, sacrificing our peace for a sense of safety that never truly arrives. Have you ever felt that heavy burden, trying to keep someone from making mistakes, trying to rescue them from consequences, or constantly adjusting your words and actions so they won't be upset? It feels like compassion, but underneath it's a desperate attempt to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty and powerlessness. There's a powerful truth here. You can care deeply for someone without taking responsibility for their journey. You can support them, offer love, and stand beside them, but you cannot and should not control their path. Because each person must walk their own road, learn their own lessons, and grow through their own experiences. A Zen story tells of a monk who saw a butterfly struggling to emerge from its cocoon. Out of kindness, he carefully cut the cocoon open to help it escape. But without the struggle to strengthen its wings, the butterfly soon fell to the ground and died. The monk realized his compassion, though well-intentioned, had stolen the butterfly's chance to grow strong enough to fly. In the same way, when we try to manage others' lives, we often prevent them from developing the resilience they need. We don't protect them, we keep them dependent. And worse, we drain ourselves, trying to control what we were never meant to control. True love isn't about micromanaging someone's feelings, decisions, or destiny. It's about being fully present with them, listening without needing to fix, supporting without taking over, and trusting that they too are capable of finding their way. It's about letting the people we love experience life's joys and challenges so they can grow into their fullest selves. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring in a healthier, more liberating way, one rooted in trust rather than fear. When you release your need to control, your love becomes spacious, unconditional and empowering. You give others the freedom to be themselves, and you reclaim the peace you lost trying to manage the unmanageable. Take a moment to reflect. Is there someone in your life you're holding too tightly? Are you trying to protect them from discomfort at the cost of your own peace or their growth? What if you chose instead to stand beside them with love and faith, offering support without needing to steer their every step? Because when you let go of controlling others, you don't love them less, you love them more honestly. You stop seeing them as fragile projects to fix and start seeing them as whole, capable beings on their own unique journeys. And in that spacious love, both of you find the freedom to breathe, to grow, and to truly connect. From the time we were children, many of us learned to measure our worth through others' eyes. A kind word made us feel proud. A disapproving glance left us ashamed. And so, as we grew, we kept chasing validation. Good grades, praise at work, likes on social media, admiration from friends. We learned to shape ourselves into whatever version we thought others wanted, afraid that without their approval, we might not be enough. But here's the quiet tragedy. The more we base our value on external approval, the more fragile our self-worth becomes. We become performers in our own lives, constantly scanning the room for signs of acceptance or rejection. Every compliment feels like a high, every criticism, a crushing blow. Our sense of self becomes a shifting house built on the unpredictable moods of others. Buddhist wisdom teaches that this chase is endless because external validation is a moving target. People's opinions change, trends come and go. What pleases one person disappoints another. And when you tie your worth to these ever-shifting standards, you give away your peace to something you can't control. Consider this. If you spend your life trying to be good enough for everyone else, who will you ever be truly good enough for? The truth is, you already are enough, not because of what you do or how perfectly you perform, but because of who you are at your deepest essence. Aware, compassionate, alive. A Zen story tells of a master who asked his student to bring him a stone. The student ran outside, picked one up, and handed it over. The master then said, "Now, take this stone to the market and ask what they'll pay for it." The student did as told. Some offered a few coins, others dismissed it entirely. Then the master said, "Now take it to the jeweler." When the jeweler saw it, he offered a fortune, for it was a rare gem in disguise. The master looked at his student and said, "Your worth does not decrease because someone fails to see your value. Like the stone, you carry your true nature within you and it remains precious, no matter who recognizes it." So how do you stop living for approval? It starts with small, daily choices. When you feel the urge to impress, pause and ask yourself, am I doing this to honor my truth or to win someone's praise? When you catch yourself worrying about what others think, gently remind yourself, their opinion of me is not my reality. You can also nurture your self-worth by validating yourself. Each day, acknowledge something you did well, not for applause, but because it aligns with your values. Did you show kindness when it wasn't easy? Did you speak your truth, even if your voice trembled? Did you keep going despite fear? Celebrate these moments, for they reveal who you truly are. Because the more you root your sense of worth in your own heart, the less power others' opinions hold over you. You begin to live with courage, to speak with authenticity, to act in alignment with what matters most to you, even if it isn't popular, even if no one notices. And as you stand firm in your own worth, an amazing thing happens. You attract relationships, opportunities, and experiences that resonate with your true self. You stop chasing acceptance and start radiating confidence. And in that quiet confidence, you find a freedom deeper than any applause could ever bring. So remember, you were never meant to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's expectations. You are enough, exactly as you are, and the moment you believe that, you begin to live a life that's truly your own. For many of us, the word surrender sounds like weakness. We think it means giving up, admitting defeat, or resigning ourselves to a life we don't want. But in Buddhist wisdom, surrender is something entirely different. It is a powerful, courageous choice to stop fighting against what is, to release the need to force life to our will, and to open ourselves to a deeper intelligence beyond our own plans. Surrender isn't about sitting back and doing nothing. It's about recognizing when your efforts are rooted in fear, ego, or resistance. It's about seeing when you're pushing so hard that you're only exhausting yourself and blocking what life is trying to teach you. When you surrender, you don't abandon your dreams. You let go of the desperate need to control every step and every outcome. Imagine rowing a boat upstream with all your strength, determined to reach your destination. The more you strain, the more the current pushes you back. You grow tired, frustrated, angry. But what if you paused, lifted your oars, and allowed the river to carry you? You might discover that the current knows a wiser path, one that takes you exactly where you're meant to be, in a way you could never have planned. Surrender is like this. It's trusting that life has a flow, and that by softening your rigid grip, you can move with it instead of against it. It doesn't mean you stop caring or stop trying. It means you stop forcing. It means you offer your best, then release your attachment to how things must unfold. There's a beautiful teaching from the Buddha. You only lose what you cling to. This doesn't mean you shouldn't have goals or desires. It means you hold them lightly, knowing that life's timing, opportunities, and lessons often come in ways you can't predict. Consider the story of a woman who dreamed of opening a tea shop. She planned meticulously for years, but every step seemed to fall apart. Her first location fell through, her business partner backed out, the market shifted unexpectedly. Each time she fought harder, determined to bend circumstances to her will, but only found more frustration. Finally, exhausted, she let go of her rigid timeline and allowed herself to explore what life was offering instead. Within months, she stumbled upon a perfect small space she hadn't considered before, made new connections, and opened a cozy tea shop that reflected her true vision, far better than what she had first imagined. It wasn't her relentless control that made it happen. It was her willingness to surrender and adapt, to trust that life's obstacles weren't rejections, but redirections. Surrender brings a quiet strength. It frees your energy from fear and struggle, allowing creativity, intuition, and peace to emerge. It invites you to meet each moment as it is, rather than how you wish it would be, and in doing so, you find the clarity and resilience you need to respond wisely. So ask yourself gently, where in my life am I rowing upstream, fighting what is, or refusing to release my need for control? What might happen if you surrendered not by giving up on what matters, but by letting go of how it must happen? Because true surrender isn't weakness. It is the deepest kind of faith. Faith in yourself, faith in life, and faith that even when the path looks different than you planned, it can still lead you exactly where your soul needs to go. In a world obsessed with instant results, we've lost touch with one of life's greatest teachers, time. We want success now, healing now, answers now. But the most meaningful things in life, growth, wisdom, love, transformation, cannot be rushed. They unfold at their own pace in their own season. Learning the art of waiting is a powerful practice because it teaches us patience, humility, and trust in the natural flow of life. Waiting is not wasted time. It's sacred space. It's the silence between notes that makes music beautiful, the quiet winter that allows seeds to rest before they bloom in spring. Yet many of us find waiting unbearable. We fill the space with worry, doubt, or frantic effort, convinced we must do something, anything, to hurry things along. But just like pulling on a flower to make it grow faster only tears it from the ground, trying to force life before it's ready only creates frustration and pain. Think of a farmer planting a field. Once the seeds are sown, there's nothing more to do but nurture the soil, water, and wait. Checking every day to see if the shoots have appeared doesn't make them sprout sooner. It only robs the farmer of peace. Similarly, there are times in life when you've done all you can, and the wisest thing left is to trust that what you planted will emerge when the moment is right. Consider the story of a man who desperately wanted to master meditation. Every day he sat with fierce determination, scolding himself whenever his mind wandered, growing angry at his lack of progress. One day, his teacher placed a glass of muddy water before him and asked him to clear it by stirring faster. Of course, the water only grew cloudier. The master then told him to set the glass down and wait. As the man watched in silence, the mud slowly settled and the water became clear on its own. This, the master said, is how peace comes not by forcing but by patiently allowing. When you understand the art of waiting, you begin to see that timing is part of life's wisdom. Sometimes delays are not denials, but divine preparation. A relationship that takes time to blossom can become stronger and deeper. A dream that takes longer to achieve often builds the patience, resilience, and skills you need to truly sustain it. Life knows what you are ready for and when. So the next time you find yourself growing impatient, ask, "Have I done my part?" If the answer is yes, then breathe, release, and let time work its quiet magic. Remind yourself that your worth is not defined by how quickly things happen, but by your faith in the process and your grace in the waiting. Because waiting doesn't mean being passive. It means staying engaged with the present, nurturing what's here, and preparing yourself for what's coming, all while trusting that life will open doors when you and the world are both ready. In the art of waiting, you learn to dance with time instead of fighting it. You discover that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to rush ahead, but to stand still, to listen, and to allow the beauty of each moment to unfold at its own perfect pace. So many of us spend our lives clinging to an old identity, a version of ourselves shaped by past experiences, family expectations, or outdated beliefs. We tell ourselves stories like, "I'm not good at this," "I'm always anxious," or "I need to be the strong one." These identities become like tight clothes we've outgrown, yet we keep wearing them because they feel familiar, even when they no longer fit who we truly are becoming. But here's the profound truth. Growth requires letting go of who you think you are, so you can discover who you're meant to be. Just as a snake must shed its skin to allow for expansion, you too must release old labels, patterns, and roles that keep you small. Otherwise, you remain trapped in yesterday, unable to step into the full potential of today. This process of letting go isn't easy. Our identities give us a sense of safety. They tell us what to expect from ourselves and how to navigate the world. But life is constantly inviting us to evolve. And every time we resist change out of fear of losing who we were, we deny ourselves the freedom to become who we're meant to be. Think of the caterpillar. If it refuses to surrender its form, it can never become the butterfly. The cocoon may look like death, but it's actually the sacred space where transformation happens. In your own life, moments when everything feels like it's falling apart may actually be the cocoon preparing you to emerge stronger, freer, and more aligned with your true self. Consider the story of a successful executive who had always defined herself by her career title. When she lost her job, she felt like her world had ended. But through this painful loss, she discovered passions and talents she'd ignored for years. painting, teaching, mentoring. By letting go of the narrow label she had clung to, she found a life of deeper meaning and joy, one she could never have imagined while stuck in her old identity. Buddhist wisdom teaches that clinging to a fixed self is a root of suffering. Everything in life is impermanent, including who we think we are. Embracing this truth frees you to meet each moment with openness, curiosity, and courage. You don't have to stay confined by your past mistakes or old versions of yourself. You can choose, again and again, to reinvent yourself as you grow. So ask yourself, what stories about yourself are you still carrying that no longer serve you? Are you willing to lay them down, even if it feels scary, to make space for something new? Because when you shed the identity that's too small for your soul, you step into the vast, limitless potential of who you can become. You give yourself permission to change, to explore, to expand beyond what you've been told you are, or what you once believed about yourself. Remember, every ending of an old identity is the beginning of a new life. And in this fearless willingness to let go, you find the power to be reborn again and again into the truest, fullest version of yourself. As we come to the end of this journey, let's take a moment to breathe and reflect on what we've explored together. We began by discovering the power of letting go, seeing how clinging creates suffering and how release brings peace. We looked at the illusions of control, the weight of old identities, and the deep wisdom in surrendering to life's flow. We remembered that waiting is not passive but a sacred space where growth quietly unfolds. And we learned that real love is never about managing others, but about standing beside them with compassion and trust. These lessons are not just ideas to admire, they are invitations to live differently. Because true transformation happens when we take these teachings off the cushion of theory and into the messy, beautiful reality of our daily lives. So I invite you, when you feel the urge to force, pause and soften. When fear of losing control grips you, breathe into the discomfort and remember your strength lies in trust, not tension. When you catch yourself stuck in old labels, dare to imagine a new story about who you are becoming. Practice surrender not as a sign of weakness, but as the gateway to true freedom. Practice patience not as a burden, but as a gift that lets life bloom in its perfect time. And above all, practice presence, because the more you come home to this moment, the more you'll find everything you were chasing already here. Remember, you don't need to be perfect to be whole or in control to be powerful. The peace you seek is not outside you, it's within, waiting patiently for you to return. If this resonated with you, and you'd like to continue exploring the timeless wisdom of Zen and Buddhist teachings, I invite you to subscribe to Zen Buddhism Wisdom. Here, we share stories, insights, and practices to help you live each day with greater clarity, compassion, and peace. Thank you for being here. May you walk your path with gentle courage, open hands, and a heart that trusts the unfolding of your life.